Okay, so tonight's lesson is going to be on inequalities. And so hopefully you can remember that inequalities have several symbols. We have the greater than, we have the greater than or equal to, oops, where'd they go? Less than or equal to, and then we have the just equals. Okay, so we want to look at several situations where you have to write something with an inequality and then graph it on a number line. So let's just say we have x, and we're saying x is greater than or equal to 7. So basically that equals to means including 7 or above. So possible answers for x could be 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So to draw that, we want to go to our number line. We want to pick 7, and we want to put a solid circle on 7. Hopefully remember from last year that solid means including. Okay, so that means 7 is a possible answer. So I'll put include. Okay, and then so is 8, 9, and 10, and so is 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. So we just draw an arrow like this. And that's very simply how you graph the inequality. You have to make sure you have a solid dot for the equals to, and then all the numbers that can possibly be placed in for 7. Okay, so let's look at another example. Let's say I have y is less than -2. Okay, so y could be any number below 2. It does not include 2. So if you remember, we use an open circle. So that means not 2, but then below, numbers lower than 2 would be this way. And so remember, it does not just include whole numbers. It includes everything below 2. So we could say -2.1, -2.2, -2.3, -3, -3.5, -4. All those numbers I could plug in for y. So if I picked a -5, I could say -5 is less than -2, and that would be a true statement. So the idea of this lesson is to remember that the filled in means equals, including that number. The open circle means not including that number, but all numbers below. And then, of course, you might just have something with the equal sign. So if we say x equals to 3, we just put a solid dot at 3, because that means only 3 is the answer. So if I plugged in at 3 for x, I'd have x equals 3. That's a true statement. However, if I plugged in -2 for x, we'd have -2 equals 3, and that's not true. So we just use one solid dot for that. Okay, so tonight, or tomorrow's lesson, excuse me, has to do with inequalities and being able to pick out those words that mean greater than, less than, and equal to. So let's look at a couple examples. Oops, wrong way. So here we have an example. Use the graph to write an equation or inequality to determine the number of laptop computers Carlos would need to earn for each amount. And this sort of goes back to yesterday's video, the graph in yesterday's video. So if it says, let's see, at least 10,000, we did that. We found that it had to be 7.5 or more. So I put Carlos's graph back over here. So the other day we found out, yesterday, that when he sold 10,000 computers, we are at 7.5. Well, obviously you can't sell a half a computer. So they rounded up to 8 and said he has to sell 8 or more. Okay, so now let's look at this one. It says less than 7,000. Okay, so we want to come over here and find 7,000. So how many computers will he have to sell to make 7,000 or less? So if we look at right here, that would be 4 laptops. So we'd have to say x is less than or equal to 4, because we want the equals to because it included 4 computers, right? And so we would say Carlos would need to sell 4 or less computers. Okay, and that would be my answer for that. Okay, but I should probably make it much smaller. Okay, so that would go here. Okay, so again, let's look at this one, less than 6,000. So again, I want to go over to my graph here and look at 6,000. So they're asking how many computers would Carlos need to sell to make 6,000 or less. Okay, Well, that is at 2.5 computers. And again, you can't sell half of a computer. So the question is, can he sell 2 computers or less or 3 computers or less? And since we're talking about money, if I sell 2 computers and less, that's going to be under the 6,000. So we're going to have to round that up to 3 computers. So we'd have to say he has to sell 3 computers or less. So he has to sell this much or less to make less than $6,000, okay? And again, I would just need to do a little writing here, and I would say Carlos, would need to sell 3 computers or I know you can't see this, to make, let's see, $6,000 or less, okay? So again, we want to have a written statement in there. So we would say, so I'll expect to see this in your notes when I come back, that I would say Carlos needs to spell 3 computers or less, and then I would write that out, okay? So let's do one more together. This one says Carlos needs to sell at least $90,000. So if I look at where $90,000 is, and I go across to my graph here, and I look down, that's 8.5 computers, okay? So again, you can't sell half a computer. He needs to make at least $9,000. So again, I would say X, he has to sell more than 9 computers, right? Because 8.5 he can't sell. He needs at least $9,000. So it means he needs 9,000 or more. So again, I would say that many, and then I'm going to go ahead and type out Carlos would need to sell 9 or more computers to make at least $9,000. Okay, so again, I hope my head's not in the way of that graph. Can't tell. All right, so that would be my answer here. So I would like for you to go ahead and do the next 2. You're going to do 5 and 6 and come in with those answers. You need to have the inequality that goes with it, and then you also need to have the sentence that goes with it. If I can move that up a little bit so you can't, I'm worried you can't see that. So I'll make it a little bit smaller. Hopefully my head's not in the way. So both things, you need to have the inequality and the written statement, or off with your head. You will be walking the plank. Mr. Cook will make you walk the plank tomorrow. Have a great night.